What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
We are riding on a railroad. That was a great song by James Taylor. I think it was the Mudslide Slim album, John Krofsik.
Oh, there's so many good railroad songs. City of New Orleans.
Okay.
That's a good one.
I've been working on the railroad.
Johnny Cash.
Johnny Cash, what was that one? Going down the line?
He's sitting in Folsom Prison.
Well, what does it have to do with the train?
Doesn't he hear the train or something?
Well, maybe.
There's some train.
Then I guess he wasn't locked away enough. You could hear the whistle.
You can hear the whistle. Yeah, something like that, isn't it?
Well, we are two guys who've been ushered out of town on a rail more times than we'd like to remember. But we're going to hang around these parts just a little bit longer to bring you a podcast. And, John, we did a podcast several months back about vintage train travel and how in vogue it is.
That was fun.
That was
it makes
really
me
a lot
want
of
to
fun.
take a train.
Where would you like to go on a train trip? Because don't forget, that's a whole vertical thing. You're just kind of going in one direction. And then, of course, it's so narrow. How long do you want to be on a train and how comfortable?
That's the question, right? When we were in Alaska, we were on a train from, I think, Fairbanks, and it took us to Denali, which was it was a nice short trip. It was beautiful.
Wait a minute. Denali, isn't that in Africa? You went from Alaska to Africa. Wow.
Denali State Park.
It must have gotten wet. Well, no, I understand what you're saying. But, the one that I think would really attract me is the Canadian Rockies.
I was thinking that, too. That looks like a nice trip.
Or maybe just going to a Colorado Rockies game. Maybe that's enough.
That would be good,
and taking a train over there.
High Stadium. Yeah, there you go.
Absolutely. Well, our state, of course, John, in a very serious vein, has been the scene of a number of horrific accidents. And we do have the power to take down one of the most important rail thoroughfares in the entire country because we're here in Connecticut. And we know that if there's commercial rail that makes sense in America, it's on the eastern seaboard. And it connects Boston and New York and Washington.
Yeah, we have a very busy railway here. I mean, it's just, it seems like every time we have an accident, we talk about putting these safety measures in these trains, and then
we don't.
Happens.
Well, there's a lot of money involved, and we all look to the Chinese, we look to the Europeans, and we say, wow, look at this high-speed rail that they have, and it looks so attractive, it seems so efficient. And in America, for some reason, not only Amtrak, but also a lot of our Metro North lines and our commuter lines really need a lot of work. They really do.
Yeah, they've really. I think maintenance is not important to Metro North, and I don't know about Amtrak so much, but Metro North right now.
Well, I think they'd like to, John. I think they all have the money in mind. They know they have the plans, but they just can't execute for some reason. Well, don't forget, a lot of the power base in America today has moved to the South and the West, and now the Midwest to some extent. And perhaps some of the influence that a lot of the blue states, along the eastern seaboard once had, they don't have as much power any longer.
Yeah, but I got to believe that they're making money on those trains.
I don't think so. I mean, honestly, I don't. I don't think rail is ever something you make a whole lot of money on, but it's an incredible service. What it does for the efficiency of your workforce. I mean, let's take the state of Connecticut in which we are living. And I would say this, honestly, we're in a heap of trouble here in Connecticut. You and I know that. Most people on the outside don't really understand that, but we really have some significant fiscal problems. But I would argue that if it was possible to do real high-speed rail that allowed people, a lot more people, to live in Connecticut, where we have a lot of good housing and we've got a lot of suburban tracks because we bought into that long ago, that if they could then live here and work in Boston or New York, they would do it.
Aren't they doing that though on that Amtrak has that high-speed train that
Well, first of all, if you're taking the Acela from New Haven, Connecticut into New York every day,
yeah.
you better have a really good job because it's
that
expensive. I mean, it really is. That's
okay,
the other
okay,
thing.
okay.
Very expensive. I'm saying that most people who do commute, they're taking one of these commuter lines.
Right.
They're not taking Amtrak. But if we could upgrade the whole system, I think it would make a big difference for a lot of people, and it would take some of the pressure that we're seeing in the housing markets in Boston and New York away, because right now those are pressure cookers.
Well, plus it would take a lot of hopefully it would take a lot of the congestion off the roads, which is horrible during rush hour if you're in, depending on where you are.
Oh, absolutely. And if we're really talking about the East Coast, which really still is kind of the center of government and entertainment in New York and a lot of investment and finance. I mean, this is an important part of the country. There's no question about it. But this has implications all across the country. And John, we have read about a lot of accidents recently down south, out in Washington State. They've been highly publicized. And I know there are people wondering, well, if I do take the rail, are they safe? And you were talking earlier about positive train control. How many times has Dick Blumenthal, our senator in Connecticut, talked to us about that?
Oh, every time there was an accident, he'd come on and it was all about positive train control, which is great. I think everybody should have that in their car. They should have it on the trains because you can avoid these accidents. I mean, I just don't understand it, why nobody does anything.
Well, we also have these bridges that go up and down to allow the trains, and they won't go down or they can't go up, or, well, they've got a problem that even Viagra can't figure out. So, I mean, there's a lot going on here, and we brought Josh Estrin to our microphones. He forensically evaluates safety issues and has taken note of a lot of these recent accidents on our rails, and he helps us to dissect whether this, in fact, is a trend. Oh, by the way, we were talking about Senator Blumenthal.
Yeah.
And I know he likes transportation, talks a lot about the rails, but I just saw him, John, in a video that looked like a hostage video because he was on the Consumer Reports track that we have here in Connecticut, where they do all the evaluation of cars.
Right.
And they had him on the passenger side. Well, I guess everybody's on the passenger side in an automated car, but they had him on the passenger side.
He was a test dummy?
And, well, well, you said that. I didn't. No, but he was there, but he looked a little shaken because don't forget, we had just had that accident with an autonomous vehicle, and there's Senator Blumenthal not looking at all comfortable. And then I saw a satire that somebody did. You know those music videos they do in cars where they bring the stars on the passenger side?
Oh, yeah.
I forgot who does that. You know who he is, the late night guy.
Yeah.
And they had him as if they were doing a song and he's listening and so forth. But anyway, it was kind of a funny bit, I must say that. But this isn't at all funny, what we're going to delve into today, because we don't like to see one life lost in the attempt to either go enjoy yourself or get to work or whatever it may be. And I love railroads in general. I mean, maybe it's the mystique and the nostalgia.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. You know, we grow up with kind of the feeling that, hey, right in the rails, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a serious endeavor that goes on and is an important part of how we get around here in America. But are we paying enough attention to it? Josh Estrin has a lot of insights for us today on America Trends. With us is Dr. Joshua Estrin, a forensic safety expert. And the topic today, of course, is railroad safety. And as you look at this area, is there a growing concern in America with some of the recent events that we are finding that our rails are not as safe as we'd like?
Well, I think that there is both a growing awareness and a growing concern. And I think it's safe to say that we're beginning to realize that our railways aren't as safe as we might have hoped or thought that they were.
And why is that?
Well, I think that as the facts begin to come out, and as any of us try to follow the news, and in this day and age it comes at us fast and furious for better or worse, we're getting the facts sometimes hour to hour, day to day. And what we are seeing is what I work with every day. In the world of forensics, unfortunately, I'm on the scene after the event has happened and after the catastrophe has happened. And what we're looking at is a system failure. I am not a constitutional law expert, but we do know that as far back as 2008, Congress was aware that there was a problem, a growing problem, and they really challenged and charged railroad companies to begin to implement technology by 2018, giving some an extension to 2020, that would avoid the kind of accidents that we saw in South Carolina. And yet, statistically, we're being told that at most 50% of railroad companies have implemented the technology that exists today, and the deadline is looming. And we're also learning from the little black box, specifically in the South Carolina incident, that this could have been avoided if they had had what's called the PTC technology, which is the technology that makes it available to slow a train down if it derailed or put on the wrong track, which in this case it was.
We'll talk about positive train control, a big issue, and I know we have a senator from where we come from who actually is very much involved in this. But the question really is about the culture of safety within the entire railroad system. I know that our president ballyhooed recently the fact that there haven't been any airline crashes in a very long time, thankfully. What about the culture of safety within the railroad administration?
Well, I think that what we also have to delineate is that when we're talking about catastrophic injury and catastrophic events, we have to make sure that we understand that we're talking about frequency, the number of times it happens, as well as severity. So while in this case our president is ballyhooing the fact that there haven't been crashes, we also have to understand that when a single plane crashes and there's no survivors, it's much different than when there's an automobile accident and there is a loss of life of 2 or 3. Now, I am not advocating that loss of life on any side is any better or worse, but we do need to be careful that we are having a discussion about either frequency or severity, and that's why safety itself is a science. So when we talk about the culture of safety, when we talk about the policies, procedures, training manuals, government mandates that drive all the safety decisions within this vertical that we call the railways. We need to admit that the system is failing because anyone that gets on a train and has the expectation of being taken from point A to point B also has a right to believe that they're going to be taken on that trip safely.
Many hear you saying that Congress perhaps is complicit in this, and yet with something that is so regulated and so much intertwined with the government, you would imagine that there'd be all kinds of procedures and safeguards that would be put in place.
Well, there can be, and I guess from a professional standpoint as well as the general public looking in, that's where the frustration comes in, and that's where I think we sometimes get lost in really trying to find a solution. Because if we keep coming to the table and debating politics rather than finding solutions, or if we keep playing the blame game. For instance, when this first happened, Amtrak said that they were in control of the train, CSX said they were in control of the tracks, so who was really to blame for this? Well, at the end of the day, there's going to have to be a decision about which party had the responsibility or the bulk of the responsibility. But as someone who looks at system failure as a way of finding solutions so that the system doesn't fail again in the future, I've come to understand, I've come to trust that we never really come to find solutions when we blame one another. So you make an interesting point. Congress realized in 2008, a decade ago to be exact, that it was going to be a problem, that this was a problem. They were trying to act proactively by putting checks and balances in place. And now here we are 10 years later with the deadline looming, and we really only have 50% of the industry showing up and putting in the necessary technology. Now we have to understand that this is not technology that needs to be invented. This is technology that exists. It's very expensive, but it exists.
And how much of this is the fact that there are these private providers across different state lines? Some might own the cars, some might own the rails. The government may be involved here and there, that there's really nowhere really that we can look to one central point and suggest that that is the pressure point, because there are so many different pressure points in the entire system.
Again, you're making my job very easy for me, because you're really highlighting some very important parts. Oftentimes when I talk about system failure, systemic failure, I ask people to envision that hunk of Swiss cheese or that slice of Swiss cheese that all of us have seen. And you have your solid parts and you have your holes. And the solid parts can be seen as the parts in the system that are working, in this case, keeping people who are riding trains safe. And those holes are where things aren't working. And the challenge between keeping a system healthy is that there needs to be a top-down, bottom-up loop of communication. So the people that are making those top decisions about safety need to be effectively and efficiently communicating them down to all the key stakeholders in the middle and at the very bottom. And at the bottom, we have the people who are operationalizing these tasks, who are taking them at the ground level every day and driving the trains, switching the tracks. And they need to be able to communicate effectively and efficiently from the bottom up to those people who have made the policies and procedures and perhaps say, hey, we need more training, which was an issue in the Washington State accident, where the conductor said he had gone to his supervisor and said, I don't really feel like I have enough training to take this train on an inaugural run. That's a red flag. When someone says that they haven't had enough training, a supervisor has the responsibility to bump that up to the top of the hierarchy of the managerial food chain, so to speak, so that decisions can be made, because it's been proven time and time again in hardcore statistical research that training and redundancy of training, meaning training over and over again, not just once, is one of the strongest potentials for avoiding what we call an unsafe act, an unsafe condition, or in most cases, a combination of both.
We'll return to this episode of America Trends in just a moment. If you like what we're doing here at America Trends Podcast, please don't keep it to yourself. I know there are a lot of people, John, who think, well, if I'm listening and somebody else wants to listen at the same time, maybe we're going to collide and they're not going to be able to hear us. Yeah. Is that the way the technology works?
No, there's plenty of bandwidth. Everybody can listen at the same time.
All right. Well, that dispels that myth. Now, you can do a number of things that would really be helpful to us. You could give us a kind rating or a review at Apple Podcasts, and that boosts what they consider to be our value and visibility. And what does that do, John?
Well, that puts us in the forefront so that you can find us easier, and most important is other people can find us easier.
And you can subscribe there or on our site, americatrendspodcast.com, or wherever you're listening, so we can alert you to new episodes of the podcast, which, by the way, we put out twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And stay in touch with us on both Facebook and Twitter at Trends Podcast. Or you can like us on Facebook or follow us where, John?
On Twitter.
On Twitter, that's right, where the world turns to hear fake news or whatever it is. Well,
Not
you can
us,
direct
though.
message us at Trends Podcast or using hashtag Trends Podcast. And you know, John, with our growing audience, and really it's been pretty remarkable, a lot of people just came to us the last month or two, and they might have missed earlier episodes. Can they get them again?
They can look through them and pick the ones they want to listen to. They're all on the website, and a lot of them are up on iTunes, many of them.
All right. Well, listen, there's lots of material to listen to. We hope you have the time, and we'll lend it to us because we try to make it worth your while. And thanks so much for listening.
And tell your friends. The following audio is available on YouTube from FreightWorks.
Positive train control is advanced technology designed to automatically stop a train before certain incidents caused by human error can occur. Collisions, derailments, and work zone mishaps. Here's how it works. Through GPS, Wi-Fi, and cryptographically protected radio transmissions, computers in locomotives and rail operation centers across the country are linked. Across the national network, critical information is continuously relayed. speed limits, train movement authorization, switch positions, location of work zones, and other key operational data. The engineer still controls the train, but PTC acts as a safeguard to prevent speed and train movement violations. The system provides an onboard warning if the train moves within the warning zone of a potential violation. Should the engineer not respond before reaching the braking zone, the PTC system is designed to automatically and always stop the train.
We now return to this episode of America Trends. When I'm looking at some data from the Federal Railroad Administration going back to March of 2017, based upon per million train miles, since 2000, they say train accident rates are down 44%, equipment-caused accident rates are down by 34%, track-caused accident rates down 53%, and derailment rates down 44%. So is there really also a perception problem here?
I think there is a perception problem, but I think that we all are smart enough to know that statistics can be manipulated. Behind every data point is a human being. And so one of the things that I would argue put forth for discussion are those statistics reflecting frequency or severity? And it appears that they're reflecting frequency. So we're seeing a decrease in the number of accidents, but in the accidents that are still happening, are we seeing an increase or a decrease in severity? I work very heavily in the construction industry, and this is a constant debate. Company A, for instance, has 1,000 incidents of someone, let's say, a broken limb. Company B only has 2 incidents, but they were both deaths. So how are we going to make the comparison between 1,000 broken arms and 2 deaths? Because in this case, we're trying to compare apples and oranges, severity versus frequency.
Is the most important thing that we can do what is called positive train control, where basically you're letting some of this technology take over if the human condition is not necessarily as keen as it should be?
I think it's a very powerful force. I think when we look at the checks and balances within any system, we look at what do we have at our disposal to tip the balance towards keeping individuals safe. So we know that we have, for the most part, trained individuals within this industry. I don't believe that very many people working in this industry wake up in the morning, walk off to work and say, today I'm going to cause a train crash. And I'm not trying to be trite or to take away from the tragedies that have happened. But human error occurs. And that's why in this society, a technological society, we've created other checks and balances like PTC, positive train control.
And explain what that is so that people understand it.
Basically, it's a very, very complex set of what we would call GPS. And so it's a way of monitoring trains so that if something like this happens, a train is traveling too quickly, or it's monitored and a train is switched to a track where there's another train on it, parked, like in the South Carolina, or actually moving, that the system can shut the train down automatically if for whatever reason the conductor is unable to do so, or for whatever reason unaware and can't do so.
When you do look at things that we have to do to maintain these railroads, maintaining the optimal train track conditions, making certain that the rail bed foundation is solid and is something that these tracks and the weight of these trains can go over, maintaining rail bridges, all of these things are part of the mix. And yet I think most of us think about the trains themselves, the conductors, and those kinds of elements. What goes into making all of this culture work?
Well, I think that when we look at this culture of safety and this climate of safety, we need to focus on infrastructure. It would be like building a house on a faulty foundation. And because the railway has been around for so long, we have to also recognize that not only do we need to make upgrades, but we need to make sure that we're building these upgrades on both a literal and figurative strong foundation. So you make an excellent point. We really have to look not only proactively at the technology that can keep it from happening, but we have to look at the nuts and bolts tracks and switching mechanisms that are being used and utilized today, and make sure that they're working. And if the way that we're supervising, if the way that we're testing, if the way that we're going in and doing evaluations to make sure on a daily basis, monthly basis, yearly basis isn't working, then we need to come to the table and admit it. I think that there's no real shame in coming to the table and saying we haven't done enough. The problem is the awareness that enough isn't being done and not coming to the table and saying, what do we do next? Because there are lives at stake here, and that's completely unacceptable. We have the technology, we have the awareness, and we have the further awareness that there continues to be a problem. And so the industry and the public needs to demand action.
The Association of American Railroads says that there is a direct correlation, and we've talked about whether something is incidental or direct in terms of looking for responsibility, a direct correlation between the increase in rail network investments and enhanced safety performance. As somebody who goes into a courtroom trying to look forensically at safety, is that true?
Well, one of the things that I find interesting, and it happens all the time, is that's really high-level language. What are they actually saying there? So we know that more trains are probably traveling.
I think they're saying they want more money, is what they're saying.
I think you're exactly right. So one of the things we look at systemically from a forensic standpoint is, can the problem be solved with money? Because, again, not making light of this, but the easiest solution to any systemic failure is throwing money at it. If it can be fixed with money, we kind of all take a collective sigh and go, wow, we got off easy on this one. What I would advocate for is what it seems as if the association is advocating for is to be working more proactively rather than reactively. Right now we're having a discussion about 4 Amtrak crashes in the last 2 months. Wouldn't it be nice, for lack of a better word, if we could have been having this discussion 2 months prior to it, saying, hey, is everything copacetic with the industry? What's going on with the tracks? We're moving into 2018, and despite the extension for some companies to 2020, do we have the technology in place so that accidents won't occur? Because, we want 2018 to be the year where we have 0 train crashes. We're not having those conversations. So I think that an opportunity to fund and to also have conversations about what we can do now to avoid accidents next week, next month, and next year are very important.
Is there anything about the model that says there is a predictive capability if we look at whether something is a growth industry that is really trying to recreate itself versus one that's on the defensive that is really just trying to sustain? And I bring this up in the context not only of railroads, because I think America's railroads have been maligned as not being world class, but I look at nuclear plants where we're not investing, and I worry about that, an industry that's beginning to shrink. Are they also going to shrink in terms of the way they look at their safety requirements because they don't have the capital to maintain things in a new first-class way? Is that unrealistic for me to worry about that?
I don't think it's unrealistic because, the facts are the facts. We're seeing accidents occur that could be avoided. So, again, when we have a situation like this, I like to leave it up to the attorneys to decide, and to the jury to decide, and to the judge to decide who's, quote, at fault here. But we certainly had a breakdown of the system. We had a set of tracks specifically here in South Carolina where they were communicating basically by phone because they couldn't communicate any other way. They were, quote, upgrading the system to try to bring it up to the standard that needed to be done. It's a horrible, horrible coincidence that this happened at a time when they were trying to implement the necessary checks and balances to keep the railways safe. We need to be able to do so at a time when you make an excellent point where the age of the railways may be declining, but during this decline, we can't create an industry that is less safe. We simply can't. And if we have legislation that's been around for the last decade that mandates that safety technology be implemented, the question can be raised, why hasn't it? The system doesn't ever fail because of a single act or a single omission.
Is the political process, though, involved here where Congress can't agree on just about anything, and they may be put certain things into effect and then not monitor or provide the necessary oversight or even take back the resources or put them into a continuing resolution that has a lifespan of a year and then has to be re-upped? So is Congress complicit in this?
As with any system, if we were to continue to move up the managerial food chain, we would ultimately come to Congress because they have passed a mandate. I guess if we were doing television right now, you'd get me giving that half smile and maybe a slight eye roll. It's what one expert does when he doesn't want to get involved in politics. But I think you've said it very well.
When we look at occupational safety and health, we think of OSHA, we think of that federal bureaucracy, and yet there are so many federal bureaucracies under attack from within and without. And I'm wondering, in this period of deregulation, whether in fact some of the safety aspects of what you look at are coming into question as to whether there is proper oversight by virtue of the changes in the federal government.
Well, I think that it's always been a challenge. We have to understand, I work a great deal with OSHA. We have to understand that many of these oversight organizations are minimum standards so that they are enforcing the bare basics, for lack of a better phrase. We are finding ourselves in an environment where not as much funding seems to be available for these organizations that have historically been underfunded, no matter who's president and no matter who's in the White House. So again, I think that if we're talking about learning from our history and not allowing our history to be a mystery, as many would say, that one of the ways that we can begin to have conversations to fix a broken system is to realize that if we have these oversight committees, if we have these oversight organizations, if we have these safety organizations with the charge to protect, to oversee, and when necessary to impose citations and sanctions, we have to give them the necessary funds to, at the very least, employ enough people to go out and investigate.
When you look at the climate of safety in America overall, as somebody who has studied this academically and in a very practical sense, do you think America does well as it relates to its safety requirements and the way it tries to protect consumers and commuters and others? How well do we do when you look at it internationally?
I think that the United States has a great many checks and balances on the books that were created with the intention of keeping the American people safe, whether we are talking about this industry, the construction industry, or any other industry. But I do also believe that just because it's written on paper doesn't mean that it's a fact and doesn't mean that we are implementing it in the most effective and efficient ways. So if we start to look at, for instance, the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the number of people that are injured catastrophically as well as fatally across the last 2 decades, we could certainly be doing more. We see consistently year after year certain industries continuing to be unsafe. The construction industry is one of them. The battle cry for a strong culture and climate of safety in the construction industry, which, for instance, rates in the top 3 most hazardous, has been going on since the implementation of OSHA. And yet when you look at the statistics, it's no more safe than it was 30 years ago, again, comparing frequency to severity. So we have to look at economic trends, we have to look at marketing trends, and we really have to take responsibility for, as consumers as well as experts, understanding that certain people, should they choose to, can make numbers and statistics say anything that they want.
Dr. Joshua Estrin, thank you for joining us today. Really interesting area. A forensic safety expert. We talk primarily about the railroads in America, but thank you again for helping us here on America Trends.
My pleasure. Thank you for what you do as well.